Thank you, everybody, for being with us this afternoon. My name is David Hill, and I'm with Hill Studio in Roanoke, and we're here to visit about a new student and staff housing possibility for DeBusk Veterinary Teaching Center at Lincoln Memorial University in Lee County, Virginia. And today's presentation is going to follow this general outline. I'd like to first introduce the project and the team, and then we'll describe a little bit about the process of developing a master plan for housing, review just for a few minutes the candidate sites, and then I'd like to spend most of our time talking about our preferred site, the Maggie's Trail site. And then finally, we're open for comments and discussion from both people here at DeBusk today and out there on the Zoom meeting. So I'll start by mentioning that this has been a very collaborative project. And first, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Virginia Housing, that is in particular Chris Thompson and Matt Bolster, I believe, worked very hard to get this project off and launched. And Linnewisco Planning District Commission, our long-term partners for many things, Frank Kibler and Rebecca Crockett, both very active in getting this together. Lee County, Dane Poe, the county administrator, has been with us all along. And not only Dane, but a number of the board members have participated in some of the roundtables, and some of the citizens of Lee County, particularly Western Lee County, I believe were right here in this very room at the very beginning, telling us what they'd like to see in this kind of project. And of course, Hill Studio is my company, and with me today, Brianna Latendre, Ross Hamas, and Maria Saxton, who all worked very hard on what I'm getting ready to show you. So it's taken a number of people to put together what you're about to see, so I can't wait to show you. So really, the first piece of this, we'll spend just a few minutes talking about the planning process that we put together. And Ross was the person who really, we started this project in February, right before we had to go all indoors. And Ross ran quite an amazing process, a virtual process. So I will ask Ross to share some of that planning process.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Ross, again with Hill Studio. And yeah, as David mentioned, this kind of kicked off back in February, but for me, it actually started kind of 2 years ago in terms of the planning process. When I was finishing up my master's at Virginia Tech, one of my main projects was focused on a project for Lee County and for the DeBusk Veterinary Teaching Center to figure out what kind of assets are in the region and what are kind of some of the gaps and some of the things that may be missing, and what could possibly benefit the region as a whole and the college as a whole. And with that, we finished that project up, and kind of as I started Hill Studio, this project came along, and this is kind of the next stage of it. So we explored some options related to housing, and we started that off by conducting some surveys back in March and April for the student population and faculty and staff with DeBusk and LMU. And that went on for about a month, and we got about 180 applicants. And that kind of transitioned into some focus groups where we met virtually like we are now with some students and faculty and staff, and kind of went over some of those results and talked about some options and things that were attractive to them. And at the same time, we had a simultaneous community survey going on, which we hosted through our website. As you all know, with COVID this year, it's been difficult navigating the engagement world. So we've started a website, and we did some in-house charrettes, as you see in the pictures over here to the right. And I'll kind of go over the surveys here. David, if you want to go to the next slide. So we started that off, and this one kind of shows the overall main points, which was, yes, there's a general need for housing. Almost everyone agreed. And the top things that people would like to see in housing would be, internet, parking, pet-friendly amenities, and being near campus, and having things like a dog park and a garden and that kind of thing. And a lot of them, as you see in the survey down there, have animals of some kind, whether that's horse or dog or cat. So we wanted to accommodate that into some of the design. So we took a lot of this information from the survey and kind of made it guiding principles for the design moving forward. And with that being said, we also asked them, what students and faculty, what type of unit building they would like to, they could see themselves living in. And the top answer was about one third of the votes was cottages, and about 1/4 of the votes got second highest, and that was apartments. Another thing to note was we asked them about, single rural units. What's your thought on that? Would you want to live in an existing home that's kind of on the landscape already? And a good portion of the people said yes to that as well. So we try to incorporate that into design as well. You can go to the next one, David. So this question kind of revolves more around proximity to things, and there's really only 2 points to that. Is that a majority prefer to live somewhere between both campuses, so we wanted to accommodate that into the site selection process. And then we wanted to incorporate the fact that a lot of students, in most cases 2 out of 3, said that they prefer not to drive more than 20 minutes. So we kept that in mind in terms of where this site should be. How far is it from DeBusk? How far is it from LMU? How far is it from some of the little towns like, Cumberland Gap? And, what's the most appropriate location for this site? And we kept that in mind throughout the whole process. This question kind of hit on more or less what the students and faculty's preferences were, more or less geared towards the students, since that was the majority of the demographic of this survey. And a majority of the students did not want to share a unit, but they did say, more than half said they would like an extra room, whether that be an extra bedroom for guests, pets, office, that kind of thing. Didn't get into specifics, just more or less things that could help guide us with the actual design of the floor plans. And then almost 90% prefer to rent. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And in terms of how much they're willing to pay, almost 1/3 would like to be less than $600 a month, but a little more than that are willing to pay slightly more, about 1/3. In terms of who took the survey, again, it was 180 results, which is a pretty good survey turnout, able to get a really good indication of kind of what the overall feel and style of this site and layout could be. But I will say a majority of them were 110 were 60% of them were 18 to 25. So that again shows kind of the veterinary student age, and then approximately 34% were 25 to 35. So again, kind of that demographic, as well as some of the staff and faculty. And less than 10 people that took the survey were over the age of 35. Majority of the people do not have children or a spouse, so they'd be living alone. They don't necessarily want a roommate either. So that's another thing to keep in mind with these 1 to 2 bedroom units that we're proposing in a lot of cases. And then less than 10 have children. Move on to the next one. The last thing I'll talk about is how we kind of help reach a broader audience. So if you go to Lee, Virginia, or levahousing.com, it'll take you to a web page, which is going to have all kinds of different variable options, and that includes feedback forms to get some ideas of people's thoughts. We use it to host the survey and to show the survey results after it was done. We recorded some videos and helped provide some resources to help describe some of these properties and some of the land characteristics and some of the guiding principles that went into these overall designs. And really, like David mentioned, just taking that information that was given by everyone throughout the planning process and integrating that into some of these principles. So I'm going to pass that off to Brianna. She's going to talk about some of those principles.
Yeah, so out of this community engagement process, we really nailed down 7 key housing principles that we then carried out throughout the project, which helped us develop both our master site plan, the individual housing concepts, all the way down to the specific floor plans that we'll be showing you. So the first one was to provide a choice of multiple housing styles. We didn't want to do a one-size-fits-all. We really thought it was important that the students and community members could have a greater sense of autonomy to choose where they want to live, whether that was apartments or single-family units. The second is to conserve the land within the context-sensitive development. We really want to maintain that rural identity of this region. We don't want to come in and throw up a bunch of high rises or giant dorms. We want to provide a larger parks and public trails within this development for both the housing community and the general public, to really nest into that existing rural landscape. Number 3 is to organize the community in clusters of 8 to 12 houses. In terms of the cottage housing that we've developed, we really think that this tight unit is important to give these residents a sense of ownership over their smaller common spaces. And it also lets the residents foster connection between each other. So you really have a tighter knit group of 8 to 12 neighbors, or for 2 bedrooms, it might be 16 to 20 neighbors rather than the massive overall development.
Okay, so with these ideas, we wanted to make sure that we could separate the pedestrian and vehicular travel, share public spaces, layer the public and private spaces, and face active rooms of the residences toward the public spaces. So with those ideas in mind, we boiled these all the survey data down to sort of these. Are you back?
Okay,
Gabrielle?
sorry about that. So number 4 was to separate pedestrian and vehicle travel. This was to remove the dangers of pedestrian and vehicle crossing, to really keep the residents safe, but then also to promote interactions amongst neighbors. So you might bump into each other as you're walking past another neighbor's front yard on your way into your house. And number 5 is to share public spaces and facilities. So the housing clusters are all have some common garden sheds and dog parks and playgrounds and these sort of facilities that are public for all the neighbors to use, to really, again, foster that sense of community. So number 6 is to layer public and private spaces. So we want our residents to be able to go out into these public spaces, but then also have their own sense of their own property. So one of the main things that was important when we talked to some of the community members was a private fenced in area for their own pets, for if you have a dog, for example, so that you could let your dog out into the backyard and not have to worry about it. So even though we really do want to foster community and community ownership, we want to make sure that each resident still feels comfortable in their own private property. And then the final principle is to face active rooms of the house towards public space. So we find it's really important that more active rooms of the home, such as the kitchens or the living rooms, are the ones facing those shared green spaces. And then the more private spaces, such as the bedrooms and the study spaces, are in the rear of the home or in the second floor to, again, foster both privacy and community at the same time, and to really make our residents as comfortable as possible. And that's all.
So we'll be coming back to talk about those principles as applied to the design in a few minutes. But the next chapter of our study was, okay, what properties might this idea fit on? What properties would accommodate this? And you can see here on this map of Western Lee County, here's where we are today, the DeBusk Veterinary Teaching Center. And we studied 4 different properties that were for sale between Rose Hill to the east and Cumberland Gap to the west. Down here is the LMU main campus. And so these 4 properties, one is called Crockett Ridge, that's the one closest to Rose Hill. We studied one called Thomas Walker Road, and then moving west, one called Maggie's Trail, and then finally Point of View. And I'm going to show you just that program that we just mentioned, kind of scattered out to see whether it would fit on these different properties. So I'll kind of go through this quickly, and then we'll move on to the final selection. We looked at this one in nearest Rose Hill. Was a quite a nice. All these were actually quite nice properties. And I believe they ranged from about 60 to about 300 acres in size. And each of these provided these. You'll see these on all 4 maps, so I'll just kind of point them out a couple times. These sort of horseshoe shapes with a common in the middle. You'll see these on all the maps. These are those clusters of 12 or multiples of 12 that you'll see placed on the land. These tend to be roads on the property. And then these redder areas, using planners' land use codes, these are more denser areas where you might have 2-story buildings or something like that. So we studied up to about 300 houses on 4 of these particular pieces of ground. The one that was proposed, there was one site proposed near Ewing that was, you can see US 58 goes right through the middle of the property. It was quite a beautiful piece of property and could potentially even do some redevelopment in the town of Ewing with that one. This one was called Point of View. It was a pretty nice knob down on, this is the Tennessee border, so it was at the very southern part of our project area. And the final one that we studied was called Maggie's Trail. And Maggie's Trail happens to be the 911 lane that goes into the property. That's what that was named after by local citizens. And this became the property that seemed to us the one that had the best potential to build out the program of what we would provide for the LMU and Western Lee County housing. In particular, this 300-acre property showed room for significant open space, and its topography allowed for us to develop a number of really sort of aesthetically pleasing forms that I'll show you in just a few minutes. And it also provides something I believe fits in really well with the agricultural pattern of that area. So let's look at Maggie's Trail in a little bit more detail. By the way, the 4 properties that we studied are all for sale, and this is a picture from the realtor's website of the Maggie's Trail property. You can see an extraordinary pastoral landscape that's there that has had hayfields and pastures, and toward the back of the property is generally wooded in character. And this topography map shows, on this case, US 58 is out here. And for a lot of people that are part of Western Lee County, there's a bed and breakfast right in here. It's called the Wilderness Road Bed and Breakfast, great big brick building. And then this property, you can see the red boundary line around it. It stretches about 1.5 miles back into here toward the Tennessee border. The rear part of the property is a little higher than the front part, and it's also a little steeper. It has a little lake that's here, a number of barns, and some houses. And you can see this pattern. It's generally open in the front, wooded in the back. We wanted to fit our development generally into that landscape patterning with the open space up front, buildings in the middle, and then forested area in the back. So you can start to see how our proposal fits into that kind of beautiful cultural landscape. And so what we'll show you here is a front that's generally open, a middle that tends to have all the buildings on it, and in the back that's also generally left undeveloped. And so a couple of the key elements of this design that we'll show is that we'll have multiple housing choices in these clusters of 12, more or less 12 houses. Active rooms of the house are toward the public spaces, and they're layers of public and private spaces. In this development, we're immersing people in the open space. It conserves the land with context-sensitive development, and it supplements the educational experience with equestrian center, some agriculture and community gardens, trails, dog parks, playgrounds, things like that. And we have separated pedestrian and vehicular travel. So if I might sound like a I'm echoing a lot of the stuff Brianna says. That's really intentional. That's what we wanted to do. And finally, we go a step further into ecological preservation. The front and rear buffer zones of the property are left generally open, which is about 2/3 of the site, or 200 acres. So it could have potential for conservation subdivision status if we wanted to pursue that. And so the land plan provides for 233 new residences and several different types of densities. The cottages are designed in arrangements around central features for spirit and harmony, and they're modeled on community designs of a bunch of successful benchmarks that we studied. So students in what we'll call these shamrocks, and it'll be obvious in a minute why. So they may prefer to live in these more rural shamrock clusters or prefer to live in more amenity-packed common areas. And so a lot of times when we develop a land plan, we give it names for certain areas just because it's easier to remember and relate to. And so I'm going to go through these 7 different community design features in a little bit more detail to try to explain the land plan. And here are the 7 areas. There's the Parkway Zone, the Horse Farm, Lower Shamrock, and you can see from the satellite it looks like a shamrock, a 4-leaf clover. Upper Shamrock, Cloverleaf, it has 3 leaves, not 4. The Common, which is some of the most dense development, and then the Long Meadow Preserve, which is back in the rear portion of the property. And Ross did this really interesting overlay where it shows how we drape the map over the topography, and you can start to see how the hills roll. Generally, you can see it's generally flat up front, and then you'll see these shamrock areas of housing are put on 3 knolls that are on the property. And then another flat spot back in here is where the common area goes, and you can see that this is the lowest part of the property going back toward the lake. And then see how steep these hillsides get back in the back. The Parkway and the Long Meadow Preserve are at the front and the rear of the property are the open spaces. The horse park is one of the introductory features, and then we see the 3 cottage residence areas, and then the common over here. So the land plan shows this in a lot more detail, and I won't read the whole thing, but generally what you'll see is the shamrock areas tend to be where the cottage clusters are, and each of these has 48 cottages and 4 faculty or staff houses, and then they have some kind of central theme in the center. So we have 3 of those, and then we have the common here, which has 76 apartments, 8 faculty and staff residences, and it's over top about 76,000 square feet of support space, and it's around about a 2-acre festival lawn. So the next series will go into this in even more detail. The first piece is the Parkway. This is the area up around US 58, and up here on the hill, you might recognize the Wilderness Road Bed and Breakfast. We have about 600 feet of frontage along US 58, and it provides for a safe deceleration lane and a turn lane. Then we would take people on about a half-mile introductory experience through the pastoral countryside, and this is a parkway arrangement. It has a great big median in the middle, 1 lane in, 1 lane out, and it's designed that way both for the scenic quality of it, but it's also, if you have a very long route into a facility, you want it to work for emergency access, and so the parkway satisfies that need. If there's an emergency and 1 lane's blocked, well, you can bring emergency vehicles on the other lane. All residences, by the way, next to the parkway is a greenway, which is barely visible here, but you can see it kind of going next to the parkway all the way back into the development. All residences are behind the primary ridge. As you're out here on US 58 and you look off to the right, there's a ridge right here. And so One of the objectives was not to have a huge visual impact on the US 58 corridor, because a number of tourists drive by there, and local folks enjoy that countryside. So really all you're going to see, currently there is a field, and there will be a field. Just has a parkway in it. This is a great big existing barn, which will be incorporated as a service barn. And then there are 3 residences already here, 1, 2, 3. And these are very appropriate for faculty and staff residences right there at the entrance. And then there's about 100 acres of pasture, which is consistent with the existing land use patterns. Here's the general idea of the parkway, is that 1 lane in, 1 lane out, and then a greenway next to it, and then fences and the pasture. This is a picture of a similar size parkway. This one happens to be in Tazewell County. But the idea is to take those lanes through the groves of trees that are already there, and so that's part of your entrance experience. After working all night or all afternoon at the veterinary center, this kind of helps you to reduce the pressure as you drive home along the parkway. There's something really pretty about driving through that intentional pastoral landscape. What's not seen here is a huge bunch of utilities that are underneath the parkway and provide a lot of the critical infrastructure, including fire protection to the entire site and sewer and water to the site. Next feature is the horse park that incorporates the existing barn, the 3 residences I mentioned, and a new stable. That's shown here, about 24 stalls. This is one of the requests of the students who are here, and also on our, who had also commented on our website. Then we have parking for people coming to the barn, dressage ring, and a regular riding ring. The idea would be for everybody coming into the development to sort of see the horses as part of the scenery. And thinking about this, it may be plenty for just the stable to take care of the existing or proposed residents' horses, but it's also a great way to relate back to the community. The stable might provide places to teach riding lessons to local people, or places for them to keep their horses, or may provide even an opportunity for something like a varsity sport for the entire LMU university, if they so desire. This is how to greet your neighbors, is come on into our stable and see that. That's a part that you can use to interface with the community. The faculty and staff housing is already there, and part of this is and these are all existing residences. This is all pictures also from the Realtors website. I believe that there are 2 real opportunities for faculty staff houses here on the property. One is permanent residences, but the other is this idea of stepping stone residences. When DeBusk recruits faculty to come here, perhaps they live on the site for a year or so while they find a place that they can live permanently in the area. Okay, next we get to the first residential village, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about this one, but know that there are 3 of these. The first one we get to is Lower Shamrock. Here was the stable, and we come along the parkway, cross the creek, and turn up and go into the Lower Shamrock. This is proposed as the first student and faculty housing cluster. It would have 48 student buildings, some of them 1 bedroom, some of them 2 bedroom, and 4 faculty staff residences. It occupies about 8 acres of the 300 acres on the property. And it has parking for everybody, about 76 spaces. As Ross said, one of the things that students really want is a parking space, so you've got to take care of that. Getting into a little bit more detail, each of these Shamrock areas has a common in the middle of it, and it can be themed to really, they can all be different. For example, this one, the first one, maybe this one has a playground in the middle of it. And so this one, if you're, as you continue to build the facility, maybe this one's great for people with young children. It might just be a specialty theme. It has community gardens, and that's what we show here, so that people can actually get out play in the dirt a little bit themselves. And half of the houses you'll see here, the ones that, this is a fence, by the way. These are oriented toward the pasture, so you can look, maybe you don't have to own a horse, you can look out there and see them. And then some of the others are oriented toward meadows that are here. Each of these little groups of 12, you'll see there's the larger acre size common for each, and then they each have a smaller little quarter acre area. Each of these has 13 or so houses around it. One, which we'd recommend at the corner, a little bit larger than the rest, is a potential faculty or staff house. That's what we see with the yellow circle. And so standing on the ground, it's hard to sometimes understand these plans, but this is how it looks when you're standing in the middle of it, so that you can see the houses all around. And we understand everybody at DeBusk has lots of pets, and so we're showing lots of doggies in the picture here to help show what it really could be like. And I believe, Brianna, did you want to pick up on this at this point?
Yeah, I'll elaborate a little more. As you can see in this sketch rendering, a couple of the houses have private fences for the doggies, like we were talking about. All of them have their own little private front porch looking out onto that central community green, those accessible walking paths that we've been talking about that really foster that sense of community. You have to walk on these central paths from that major part, the grouped parking areas. So you do, walk past your neighbors into your front yard, really fostering that sense of community. But they're not cookie cutter. They all have their own little variant, different colors, different style of porches. And I believe in the next slide, I'll get into the particular housing styles. Yes. So we've come up with 4 potential housing concepts for the different styles of cottage housing that students might want. So this particular one is a 2-bedroom, 1 bath. This is in the medium size. With the living room facing the front central green, dining at the center, and the kitchen in the rear. So this particular house has both a covered front porch and also a private deck at the back. So you have both your community facing and your more private outdoor space. And then there are 2 bedrooms as you come to the top of the stairs with a shared bath. So neither one is really a master. They're really both for 2 college students sharing a bath equally. Go to the next slide. Yes. So here's another similar 2-bedroom, 2-bath. It's slightly larger with a bigger living room on the front floor. And this one also actually has a half bath on the main floor as well, and a washer dryer. So a little bit more amenities. This concept 3 is I believe the largest 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and it has offices. That's the major difference in this particular one. Some of the students talked about wanting their own private study space in their apartment, and this one, each bedroom has their own study space, which is really nice for a college student. And the last one, this next slide, is a 1-bedroom. I believe it should be 600 square feet, I'm not positive, but this also has a private study space with a 1-bedroom, 1 bath. So it's the most private out of all of them. Yeah, if you'll keep going. So here you have just zoomed in on a little bit more of the character of the different spaces. You can see the covered front porches on the front overlooking. All of them would be really wonderful to live in.
Yeah. So thank you. And the first phase would have that lower Shamrock, and then as soon as there was demand, we proposed we move into upper Shamrock, which is pretty similar to the first. The difference when you zoom in a little bit more is that this one actually was much more themed toward dogs and less toward kids, and so it has a dog park in the middle. But generally, it's very similar. And these kind of houses are it's interesting to see these kind of houses, even when you see that this is we found this cluster of similar kind of houses after we were working with the sketches, and this one's in Virginia Beach, but it's a similar size and scale. You can start to see how when everybody has a porch, a lot of checking on each other happens outside as you see people walking by, and sort of an old style way to check on your neighbor. After these two cottage areas are completed, this would be when, depending on the market, when we would propose the largest piece of construction, which is called the Common. And this is back in a flatter spot near that upper Shamrock. This area proposes 2-story mixed-use development around a 2-acre central open space. It includes 76 student-size apartments and 8 faculty or staff residences. And also potentially could be open to, as are the cottages, open to other potential tenants, not just members of the university community. And it takes up about 12 acres, including the open space areas, and has about 181 parking spaces. So the area here that we call the Common, if you look around here, these are the larger buildings with solar panels on the roof. And so in there, you'll see on the first floor uses commercial kitchen or community kitchen, because, especially if people are living in the smaller cottages, if you need if you have a larger group gathering, you can use the community kitchen. Also can be used for canning and that kind of stuff. Boutique grocery, not right next door to the community kitchen, which could be handy. Laundry facility, pet shop, because we understand all of the bus kids have a whole bunch of pets, and so you need to always be buying them things. Potential for LMU bookstore, cyber cafe. This was one of the things that was mentioned in there in the studies. At the top of the key here is the fitness center. This is proposed as about 11,000 square feet, but with an elevated track on the second floor and views out toward the lake. Dog park, coffee shop. Frank reminded me this morning, you got to make sure you tell coffee shop, because that's what all students like. And then local interest market stalls. This idea is sort of a general open market, but a way to communicate back to the community and help the community is, special stalls, artisans, could be just about anything there. Same with local restaurants that could be run by local restaurateurs, and then a leasing office. So all that's on the first floor. In the middle, potential for band shell and sort of festival lawn that has parking all around it. There you go. And these pictures, even though we borrowed them from the internet, kind of get across the idea of the flavor that we're trying to get out there. Buildings that have large expressive porches, upstairs is residences, downstairs lots of open space, glass, etc., and upstairs residences. And then here's how it looks, sort of all together. And so what you can see in this picture, we have a boulevard coming in and then a one-way loop with parking all around it. And you'll see a lot of these arcaded or glassed first floor spaces, and then upstairs the apartments. You can see the solar panels on the roof. And then, a lot of these places have outdoor terraces for eating, dog park area back here. Here's the health club. And so this becomes a really a high amenity area for the students to use, but it also can be a great tie to the community, especially if we want community folks to run a lot of these businesses and could even potentially live here. You'll see the smaller bandstand here in the middle. And then outside, this is community orchard and community garden spaces out this way. So this would potentially be a place to live if you didn't really want a cottage, but we're a little bit more interested in sort of a little bit more lively surroundings. And here you can see greenways connecting everything. So outdoors, community gardens, orchard, band shell, We can take some of the parking and turn it into food truck rodeo if you want to, where we bring in the food truck certain times of the year. Dog park out here, and then this festival lawn. And the festival lawn, you see it here in the middle. The idea is that it can be really lively or really quiet. You expect a typical Tuesday morning, people just kind of out here, just kind of grooving on the grass. Then the community garden space is a great place to work together. Community orchard, really for its scenic and seasonal qualities. And then you can transform this space with this little gadget here. It's called a utility bollard. I try to bring that to attention to just about anybody that'll listen, but this has inside it water, sewer, and electrical. So you can bring in food trucks like you see in the bottom picture and plug them all in, and they don't have to run their motors, and they don't have to have a bunch of pipes and wires everywhere. You just sort of plug them all in and have a festival, and then you unplug them and they all go away, and the next day you're back to this. And so it could be a really interesting kind of quiet and noisy space. The final of our housing areas is up on another knoll. It's a little bit more, it's a funny shaped knoll. It's kind of a curved knoll. So this one became the cloverleaf rather than another shamrock. And the area that's the steepest grade into the woods has a pretty sharp drop off here. And so those are tree houses instead of another little horseshoe of regular houses. So this one has sand volleyball in the common. This one might be where some of your younger people without dogs and without kids might live. This one maybe a little noisier up there in the woods. And so this one has 39 cottages and 3 tree houses. What's a tree house, you might ask? Here's the idea. You're going to keep the big trees that are there, and so you build the building up on piers, and then you can actually have a at-grade little bridge that comes into it. And you see these kind of cottages. These were built at Mountain Lake, for example. It's very doable, and you kind of get this idea of being in a tree house when you're in the buildings. So here's a little summary of the housing program. The 3 existing faculty staff homes, the faculty student apartments. I'm glad Ross brought that to my attention. FS means 100 different things to 100 different people, but I think those in the university community know as faculty staff apartments. 76 student apartments, 8 faculty staff cottages in the Shamrocks, 100 single cottages, 35 2-bedroom cottages, 3 tree houses for a total of 233. The land is quite flexible. That's just sort of where we were coming from. This would provide housing for, say, 300 to 400 people. And I believe LMU DeBusk has about, this would currently house the majority of the facility, but you realize that LMU is going to grow, and actually this may grow with it. So there will always be lots of other housing opportunities in the region, and not everybody's going to want to live here. So the very last piece of this is called Long Meadow Preserve, and that's up here at the very far right end. This area was suggested as one thing it could be is a long-term area for expansion, but listening to the needs of the students and the interest of the students, right now it's suggested that it be hiking. And I didn't mention this in a lot of detail, but the lake would be enhanced with a higher dam. That would solve some of our stormwater issues, and it would also make it a little bit more recreation-oriented. The common is right in this area. This is a small nature center that will be placed on the lake. And then over here, these little guys here is a small-scale wind energy project. You see a tiny tower at Mountain Empire Community College. It's just a little taller than the street lights, but imagine 10 of those in a ring to generate small power to supplement the solar panels for the common. Okay, a few practical matters. we've been dreaming a little bit, and now we got to get serious. One is phases. I've shown you maybe a 10 to 20 year dream. And so if you, and people said, well, David, that thing's the size of an elephant. Well, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Okay, that's the only way you can eat an elephant. So the first phase is the first bite at the elephant, which includes the parkway, the horse park, and Lower Shamrock. It gets in place the first 52 living units, and it brings a whole lot of the infrastructure into the site. Second phase, a pretty easy addition, it's Upper Shamrock. Then when there's critical mass and need, we really take on the biggest part of this, which is the common. That's also when we make the improvements to the lake for stormwater purposes. And then finally, the Cloverleaf and Longmeadow Preserve. So you start at the front and you kind of build your way to the back in 4 bite-sized pieces. Ross has been studying the utilities for this, because part of this we have to gracefully coordinate with the expansion of utilities. Ross?
Yeah, thanks, David. In terms of utilities, there's obviously 3 that come to mind. They're most important for a development of this size: water, sewer, and internet. So water is covered to the site. One of the reasons why this site was chosen not only is because it's so close in proximity to everything, was also because it's actually on Highway 58. It has that frontage that David mentioned. So there still would be the need for an 8-inch line that goes into the site. And this is for things like, fire safety. There needs to be fire hydrants with the development this size to meet codes. Sewer is a little bit different story. There's an existing sewer line that stops approximately 25 miles up Highway 58 near Jonesville. There's currently a project by the Army Corps of Engineers that I think is mostly at this point slowed down because of COVID, but I think they're full steam ahead going into the future, and maybe a project like this, this size could help kind of push that along. The next community that they would hit coming down from Jonesville, as you see up there on the map, is Rose Hill, and then you kind of start to see the scale. Once you hit Rose Hill, you're right there at Ewing, and then you're right there at the Bus Veterinary Training Center, and then you're right there at the site where you see that red dot. And where that red dot is also Wilderness Road State Park and some other development. So there's definitely, between like the little village of Ewing and then the village of Rose Hill, there would be definitely a great benefit of that project extending its way down. I think that's just a matter of time at this point. And then again, this project could weigh in majorly in those future next steps. And the last thing I'll mention is the internet, which actually currently does have a fiber optic box connection to the front of the site. That is by Point Broadband, which is former Sunset Communications. So there just need to be an extension from that point. It does have fixed and wireless broadband already on site, but that's kind of old technology at this point. We got to get a little bit faster megabytes per second on our internet if we're going to be able to have these Zoom calls in the future. And also it's got suitable wireless LTE and mobile coverage. From what I hear, it really depends on your provider. I hear from some people, if you're on one side of Ewing, you get service by AT&T, and if you're on the other side, you get Verizon. So pick your poison there. And then lastly, there is no cable or DSL, which is to be expected in a rural place like this. So really the only major bumps in the road is the sewer line in terms of utilities. And there are some temporary options that could be explored in the meantime, depending on kind of the timeline of how that project evolves and how this project evolves. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind in terms of utilities and the actual feasibility of this project. Thanks, Dave.
Right, thank you, Ross. Part of the couple things in the favor of this site, one is in this utility page is definitely one of them. A couple of those sites were actually eliminated really because of the difficulty in getting utilities to them versus the ease on this one. Plus, this one is midway between DeBusk Veterinary Teaching Center and the main campus, and since students take classes both places, it made it a really convenient spot. So, practical matters again, we need to consider if we want to choose this site, consider figuring out how to get an option on this land and get a due diligence period. And then really work through public acceptance and endorsement, working with the PSA on the timing of these utility extensions, working with Virginia Housing on developing a reasonable funding stack to sort of figure out how to finance this pretty significant project. Also, work on the project delivery method. How do we plan to develop this? We also need to work during the due diligence period on the zoning, and we've looked at the VC, Village Community District, and also maybe potentially R2 might be a category that would be reasonable for this. And then finally work with VDOT on how we get an entrance permit in and maybe a better median crossing. So, we've just scratched the surface on this and brought a lot of things up, but these are certainly some of the next things that we should really look at to determine feasibility. So this really concludes our formal presentation, and we'd be delighted to answer any kind of questions or listen to any kind of comments that you might have. Right.
I have a question.
Yes, actually, I'm sorry, Rebecca was bringing up that one of the issues the students brought up was, and sorry, you might have been able to hear it, but you either have to drive to Middlesboro or her just to get coffee or something to eat. And so that's what we were hoping to kind of cure with that little cluster of buildings on the common would be, getting. Yeah, be phase 3, and so yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we could switch it up. If you think that was such a priority, we could switch it up. You could build phase 3, you could switch 1 and 3 if you thought that was the way to go to get some of that, or potentially start with a building or 2 in that common, right? There you go. So you could start in, especially, I was listening to some stories earlier today about the incredible culinary talents of Lee County and some of the cooks around who can do especially breakfast and things like that. It seems like we might want to go on a recruiting binge to get just the right chef and start that out because, thank you for bringing that back up. Yeah, great idea. Can you all on Zoom hear the comments from the room? No? Okay. No. This was a comment that said, students actually spend about an hour and a half a day driving from one campus to the other. And so if anything that we could do to sort of short circuit that so that it wasn't required.
It's required by their schedule. You have an hour and a half to drive 14 miles and eat lunch.
Okay, so it's an hour and a half to drive 14 miles and eat lunch. So anything we could do to fix that would be welcome, right? Okay, thank you. And I think there was somebody on the Zoom that had a question.
Yeah, this is Matt Bolster from Virginia Housing. And I was just wondering who the primary driver of this would be. Would it be LMU that would be the one spearheading this? And if so, would there be a certain point person there who would be in charge of this project?
Well, we've had one conversation about that, and I think we still need to figure that part out. I hope that's not speaking out of turn. Matt, I met with the management team this morning, and we were there may be several ways that we could do this. Could potentially be LMU, a real estate foundation, could potentially be more like we see in Virginia, like a PPEA kind of project. There are several alternatives that I think we might start focusing on that part of the project next is, how do you do this? But we don't have that completely figured out.
Thank you.
Okay.
There is no line between Jonesville and Rosehill. This would be totally new time coming out to you.
Okay, that comment was also regarding the sewer. The sewer that we will get at this particular site will be coming from Cumberland Gap East. So, and also management team visited about that this morning and how to potentially phase it. It may be possible to get into some of the earlier phases with a local mass sewage system that can later be connected to the sewer if we got out ahead of the sewer. I think eventually we would want all of it to be connected if we could. And actually, Rebecca, that might be why it was part of our reasoning to think about maybe don't put in the larger commercial spaces till you can actually get the sewer to it. But this idea of a smaller starter package, I think that could work great. So we'll reshuffle that a little bit. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, I thank you all for allowing us to really dream a little bit about this. Personally, I'm very excited about this project, and I think it could contribute a lot to LMU, to the bus teaching facility, and to Lee County. I see it as a tremendous win-win for everybody if we can get this up and really moving. So thank you all very much. It's been a real treat to work with you on this project. I look forward to continued progress.